Welcome back to IDP Plus Trends. On this episode today, we're going to talk some overvalued players, combined offense and IDP. So we got every position on the offense, and we got some defensive backs and linebackers to talk about who we think right now are being overvalued, not only in drafts but in rankings. You know, these all of our rankings are coming from the Fantasy Pros platform, Fantasy Pros website. And as a disclaimer, I love Fantasy Pros. I'm not here nitpicking them. Steve's not here nitpicking them, saying they're horrible at what they do. They're great at what they do. That's a lot of our research is based on that. But a lot of the people in your league are going to be using Fantasy Pros. That's why we are going to reference them. So before we start, I just wanted to say, if you have not checked out the website Trophy Smack, they have a great selection of trophies right now. You might want to get one for your own league upcoming this year. And also right now, Trophy Smack, the link is in the description. They are selling a draft kit so deep you will not have to write a player write in again. They have every player available for a sticker for your live draft. So if you got an upcoming live draft, check out Trophy Smack, get a trophy, get a draft board. You'll be all set for the season. So Steve, we're going to spark it up here with quarterbacks, and I'll go first, man. A quarterback who I think is being overvalued right now at number 7 overall. We're talking about top 8 quarterbacks. Like, this is bread and butters here. This is going to be a first maybe in a super flex round 1. If not, maybe round 2, round 3. But Kyler Murray for me, man, at 7 overall. I'm not saying I don't see the potential with Kyler Murray to do well. He had a great season, 2021. I believe he had 24 passing touchdowns, 11 rushing touchdowns. But at the same time, he's missed 18 of the last 51 games. That's 35%. Over his last 19 games, he has just 24 passing touchdowns, which is only 1.3 passing touchdowns a game. As far as the 2021 great year I'd mentioned, in that year he had 11 rushing touchdowns. Over the last 3 seasons combined, I know he's missed games, but over those last 3 seasons, he's only had 11. So he's 1 year in 2021, he had 11. The last 3 seasons, he matched that. It took him 3 seasons. So granted, he was hurt. And that's the thing with Kyler Murray is he's 27. Maybe he's definitely their franchise quarterback, at least for this year. Maybe the Cardinals try to protect him a little bit. I know there's some hype about rookie Marvin Harrison Jr. coming into the league, and I'll get to him in a little bit. He's also on this list. But if we're talking about a quarterback that we're drafting early, I typically don't like to draft quarterbacks early. But if there is one guy or 2 guys that I'd like to draft rather than Kyler Murray, these guys are ranked 12 and 14, and that's Jaden Daniels and Jared Goff. I mean, first off, with Jaden Daniels, I get it. Like Marcus Mariota right now is said to be in competitions to start. Like there's some hesitation there. We saw what Sam Howell did last year. To me, I call it a good year. But at the same time, a lot of people are thinking maybe there's a stigma like, oh, Washington rookie quarterbacks, maybe they're not going to hold their job in year 2. Maybe something goes wrong. I'm pouncing on that opportunity, the upside there. Take a look at what CJ Stroud did last year as a rookie. So Kyler Murray, I think, is very risky. Although, like I said, I absolutely do see the upside. There is some rushing prowess to his game that maybe like a Jared Goff doesn't have. But I tell you what, Jared Goff over his last 2 seasons, that's 34 games. He has not missed any of those games. He has 59 passing touchdowns. That's a buck and a quarter, or I'm sorry, a buck and 3 quarters, 1.75 touchdowns, throwing touchdowns per game. Over the last 2 seasons. So a big spike from Kyler Murray's 1.3. And these guys, like I said, Jaden Daniels, 12th overall. Jared Goff is 14th overall. You can get these guys a round at least later than Kyler Murray. So even though with Marvin Harrison Jr. there, I know we got a good offense in Arizona. I just don't see the passing upside to Kyler Murray. And if you're banking on the rushing touchdowns, I don't really see that returning to 11. Absolutely not. I mean, this is a guy who's often been injured. They're going to protect their franchise quarterback. So Kyler Murray at 7 is a little bit overvalued. I'd rather have those 2 players a round or 2 later. Maybe you're like me and you think that quarterback, it's not really worth drafting early, which is absolutely a fine tactic. If you're looking for a later quarterback, maybe even in a super flex league as your QB2, you might think of Deshaun Watson and see the potential upside. We saw him have a couple 6, 7 rushing touchdown seasons there in Houston. Those days are out the window. Over his last 12 games, over the last 2 seasons for Deshaun Watson, he's only had 2 rushing touchdowns combined in those 2 years. More so, 14 total passing touchdowns in the last 2 seasons. So out of 12 games, he's had 14 passing touchdowns. That's 1.2 a game. That's even lower than Kyler Murray. So, I'm a big Steeler fan. I'm from Pittsburgh. It's not really the reason why I throw shade at Deshaun Watson. It has nothing to do with him personally. I'm just talking from a business standpoint. And if you're looking for a quarterback who throws the ball, I don't think the Browns have ever done that. I don't think they will do that this year with Deshaun Watson. Last season, in his 5 completed games, he played 6, but only completed 5. He only had 1 game over 250 yards. So there's definite injury concerns there. There's definite upside limitations as far as Cleveland. So at 21, I mean, I'm not saying that, there's a boatload of options, but somebody who I do like better is Baker Mayfield, 1 spot behind him at 22. Baker Mayfield last year in 23, he had 28 passing touchdowns. He actually had the same amount of rushing touchdowns as Deshaun Watson last year, which is a pretty crazy stat. They both only had 1 last year. So don't look at me and say Deshaun Watson's such a great runner. He did the same thing as Baker, albeit in many fewer games. And last season, if we're talking about passing yards, that's what makes it up for it in Baker Mayfield's case. He doesn't have the rushing upside, of course, but at the same time, 7 out of 17 games, almost half of those games, Baker Mayfield's had over 250 passing yards. So really safe option here. I know they lost their coach Canales. He went to Carolina, but man, I just see miles of difference between Baker Mayfield and Deshaun Watson, and one's ranked higher than the other. So I think Deshaun Watson at 21, not a guy I'm really interested, especially even in the super flex, I should say. But Baker Mayfield, I think there's really great opportunity there for him in his second year and second good year for the Bucs. So that's my 2 quarterbacks who I think are overvalued. Steve, you got any quarterbacks who you think are overvalued?
Yeah, I mean, I've got 1 quarterback I want to mention. It's funny you mentioned Deshaun Watson. I actually tweeted out that my hot take this season is Deshaun Watson gets benched for Jameis Winston. I think Winston takes over the job, which I think fantasy-wise is amazing. That's personally what I'd like to see. But the quarterback I have is the hot quarterback this year. He's on everyone's list, which is Anthony Richardson for the Colts. I understand the hype, right? He averaged over 18 points in fantasy. The games he was able to play and, prior to injury. So I get it, right? His rushing ability, his big arm, like I get the excitement. But I guess maybe for me, there's a couple things I want to mention. Like you mentioned, Jaden Daniels, I think is a better option. I think he's a better quarterback. Anthony Richardson no one spoke about him at all in college until obviously the year of being drafted. In maybe it's a weird stigma, but I just believe Florida quarterbacks just don't translate well into college or from the college to the NFL. Richardson is a big guy. He's not very accurate. He tends to take sacks when he doesn't need to. He does rely on his running game a little too much, which could cause injuries. So something of a risk you have to deal with. And the reason why I have him on there is just because he is being treated too highly. Like, again, if we're talking being drafted, QB 10, 11, this is a whole different list. But when you're talking about a guy who's being treated as a top 5, essentially, quarterback this year, what has he done in college? And then obviously the last few years that really proves it. Like those few games were great, but if you actually look at his stat line, I was looking at it earlier and I'll pull it back up. He had a 33-point game or 20-point game, and a lot of it was, again, his 4 rushing touchdowns, which is a phenomenal thing. Like, let's talk about Jalen Hurts, who's a rushing touchdown phenom. Like, that's what he does well, which is why he's a valuable fantasy quarterback. I don't see that happening because Jonathan Taylor is back. It's something that they didn't really have a lot last season. And I do think defenses will, given a whole training camp to focus on this guy, that changes a lot when you go into year 2, year 3, and 4. Like these teams are going to be game planning a lot better. So for me, I think Anthony Richardson is just way too highly drafted. I mean, again, I'll let my league mates get him. I'd rather get value somewhere else in another position and get a quarterback later.
Yeah, I feel that, man. Good, well said about the hype. A lot of hype right now for Richardson. Another guy who you might call overvalued right now. Absolutely, he's going super early. A lot of potential, but a lot of risk there too. Absolutely. Moving on to wide receivers. The first wide receiver I wanted to mention to me, who I think is overvalued, obviously a huge talent, obviously projected to be the number one rookie, and that's Marvin Harrison Jr. at 11. I mean, 11 is just that's the number. That's the reason why I think he's overvalued. I mean, we got some really great vets that I'll mention a little bit later who I'd rather have, but 11, man, that's like a first, second round pick, first or second, your first or second round pick straight up. And to me, I get it. There's immense potential there. I'd mentioned Kyler Murray, man. Kyler Murray, first off, Kyler Murray in 2021, his best season to date. His leader in touchdown passes, touchdown receptions, I should say, was DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins in 2021 was elite. He was drafted as one of the top receivers, rightfully so. Besides that, Kyler Murray doesn't really have that touchdown upside with one given receiver, with the whole team, regardless, rather than just one receiver. But I mean, we look at an offense here. You have Kyler Murray, who has question marks about health as it is. Trey McBride is going to get his. They have Michael Wilson, who's a coveted second-year receiver now. They also have Zay Jones. Don't forget about Zay Jones. Kind of an asterisk next to his name last year, but in 2022, he had a great season. I believe 8 or 9 touchdowns himself. And they got James Conner running the ball too. So, I mean, how much volume really can Marvin Harrison Jr. get? I mean, it's understandable to say he'll have 1,000 yards, but like I mentioned, man, with Kyler Murray at the helm, 8 touchdowns is the most he's ever had to a receiver. If Marvin Harrison goes for 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns, then boom, my take's out the window, and he's absolutely elite, and his potential might be that. But to me, it's just a lot of risk right now for a rookie. About 2-3 years ago, I would say like rookie receivers, throw them out the window. They're really not going to do that well. Times have changed on that. And if I'm going to take a shot on a rookie, it's going to be Malik Neighbors at 24 overall. We're talking not 11 overall, but Marvin Harrison's 11 in the wide receivers. Malik Neighbors is 24 in the wide receivers. That's at least another round or two later. I think Malik Neighbors absolutely has that crazy volume. You don't have Trey McBride there. You don't have really a coveted second and third receiver. So I absolutely do think that volume will be in Malik Neighbors' favor. So that's somebody I'd rather have over Marvin Harrison Jr. Also, man, the disrespect to DK Metcalf. I mean, Harrison Jr. at 11, then you got DK Metcalf at 17. If we're talking about touchdowns, that's a big hesitation I have with Marvin Harrison is his quarterback, the Kyler Murray. Can he throw him those touchdowns? The yards, I absolutely assume that Marvin Harrison will go over 1,000 yards. But when we look at him ranked over a guy like DK Metcalf, a vested vet, I mean, Lockett's getting older. DK Metcalf in the last 5 seasons, 3 of those seasons have been 8 or more touchdowns. He actually had 2 double digit with 10 and 12 years with double digit touchdown receptions. So like, this is to me a much safer pick, and he's at least around later. Marvin Harrison, I can't guarantee those touchdowns, and DK Metcalf's just a freak in the red zone, averages over 1,000 yards. So I really can't justify Marvin Harrison Jr. being over both of these guys. And another guy I wanted to mention later in the we're talking about sleepers here. I actually got 2 of them. I got Odunze and then Jameson Williams. I really can't justify drafting either of these guys. They both obviously have upside of their own, but I mean, we look at the offense for Odunze. Odunze's at 45. This is pretty deep here, late round pick, especially if you're in a shallower league. But I mean, we got Keenan Allen at the helm. We got DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, and we got Caleb Williams, who scrambles too. I think Odunze is super talented. Don't get me wrong, but it's just a bad landing spot overall. I don't think he's really going to get volume in that offense. And that's my hesitation with number 46, Jameson Williams, too, man. I mean, he played 12 games in 2023, only one with 5 or more receptions. And I just can't have that on my team. I mean, I get it. The price tag is not crazy. It's not like he's top 30, top 25, anything like that. So it's not ridiculous. But if he doesn't catch a touchdown straight up, he's hurting you. And I get it. Like, maybe the fact that Josh Reynolds went to a different team, he's now in Denver, opened up looks for Jameson Williams. I do think he will be the number 2 wide receiver, that is. But on the team as a whole, I mean, you got Jahmyr Gibbs, you've got Sam Laporta catching balls. I mean, these are guys who are going to maybe out look as far as targets Jameson Williams himself, right? So then we have 2 good running backs here in this offense in Detroit. Don't forget. And I mean, I just think there's a bunch of targets that are already guaranteed to these other guys. I really don't see, just because Jameson Williams is the number 2 receiver now, that volume's going to absolutely spike. I don't see many 5 or more reception games. I mean, that's to this point not really his game. He absolutely has oozing potential with that 3 or 4 catches for like a 40-yard touchdown. And like I said, the weeks that he's not doing that, I think he actually will hurt you. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he was just not healthy last year, coming off injury, and maybe things clicked this year. But to me, as it stands right now, I just really can't bank on Jameson Williams. Maybe you can call him a little bit inconsistent right now, and I'll be willing to be wrong on this take. Like if he goes out and is a dominant number 2 receiver in that offense, I'll just admit that I'm wrong on that one. But it's not going to be me who's going to go out by Jameson Williams. And there's a couple guys. I mean, if we're talking about later round targets, Jameson Williams is 46. I mean, we've got the whole Buffalo squad, the whole Buffalo pass receivers. Keon Coleman is at 50, 4 picks later, 4 slots later. Curtis Samuel back in the slot for Buffalo, he's at 52. And Khalil Shakir, great efficiency. I think he's on the upswing too. He's at 58. So these are 3 guys that would actually rather take over Jameson Williams and Odunze. So I really can't justify them. Even going down the further down the list, another guy I try to avoid this year is Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks is at 55 overall. Granted, it's not a big price tag either for him, but I mean, we've got reports of Jalen Tolbert looking good as perhaps a number 2 receiver there to CeeDee Lamb. So, I mean, unless CeeDee Lamb really doesn't play this year or he gets injured, I really don't see Brandon Cooks having that huge upside, and I really don't see him having huge volume either. That's another thing with Brandon Cooks is just the volume. I mean, him and Jameson Williams might be better best ball targets, but for me, if I'm trying to bank on a flex, a wide receiver, I'm not really counting on any of these guys. So, I mean, at 55 overall, guys I'd rather have at that position at that point in time are Marvin Mims. I mean, Troy Franklin, both of these guys from Denver. Somebody's got to be the number 1. Marvin Mims is 16 spots behind Cooks at 71. Troy Franklin at 77. So there's a legit story to be made about these guys outperforming a guy like Brandon Cooks. So if you're late in your drafts, I wouldn't just take Cooks because he's a default number 2 there. I'd take a shot on one of these other guys later in the rounds with Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin. Steve, you got any wide receivers that you're thinking are overvalued at this point in time?
I've got two of them. I've got 2 big names. Just because, again, I'm not sure what the hype is. I've got Chris Olave is the first one. Right now, he's being treated as wide receiver 11. He's going into like the second round, mid to late second round. I don't get the hype. The whole Saints team in general is not a very promising team at all coming into this year. We're not sure what's going to happen with Derek Carr. How's he going to perform? I'm not worried about Shaheed as a wide receiver 2. So a lot of the focus will be obviously on Chris Olave. Chris Olave's best year was last year. He finished wide receiver 16. So maybe it's just projections are just expecting to kind of keep moving up. I don't think that's going to happen. I think he kind of stays stagnant. I think he's more of a wide receiver 2. I think he's in the wide receiver, 17 to 20 range. I think it's a little bit more respectable, kind of where he finished last season. But stretching into the wide receiver 11 spot, I think is just a bit too rich for me. Again, if I'm going to avoid all shares of Olave, if that's what I have to pay to get him onto my team, because I don't think it's worth it. There were too many games last season. Even last season, he was just inconsistent. There were some games he would blow it up, and there were games he just disappeared. He'd have 3 or 4 weeks of just average points that just didn't allow you to have success. And, we talked off screen that, you've got to hit your first round, and you've got to, almost treat your second round as the same. Like those 2 rounds are so important. You can't buy the upside per se. Sleepers are what you do in the later rounds. Those are guys that you take a little bit more risk, but these first 2 rounds are so important and so crucial for you to get to your championship. I'm not going to mess around with Chris Olave. And another guy I'm going to mention, he's a hot topic right now. He's all over Twitter. He's everywhere. He's all over Sports Center and all that is Brandon Aiyuk. Obviously Aiyuk is dealing with a potential trade. There's all these rumors of him going to possibly Steelers. Maybe he's going to the Patriots. There's all kinds of stuff. I think he ends up staying in San Francisco. I understand the idea of going to Pittsburgh. I think he wants out. For fantasy's sake, Brandon Aiyuk has to stay in San Fran. for him to keep the value. Right now, he's treated as wide receiver 16. If he goes anywhere else, Brandon Aiyuk will not be a top wide receiver. He'll be a very low wide receiver too. I like Aiyuk. Don't get me wrong. I think Aiyuk is the better receiver when it's compared to Deebo Samuel. Obviously, Deebo is a lot more than just a receiver, but Brandon Aiyuk was perfect for that offense. If he goes to Pittsburgh, for example, which is the hot team, we don't know who the quarterback is. We don't know what Philly or what Pittsburgh has to give up. Or do they give up Pickens for Aiyuk? Like, we don't know if that's a thing. Like, we don't know how that's going to play out in this trade. So I don't trust Brandon Aiyuk at all. I don't know what his landing spot is, and I don't trust him currently right now of where he's being drafted.
I feel that, brother. I mean, I think I'm with you. I don't think Aiyuk gets traded. We're gonna move into the running back situation. Steve, you got a hot take on this one, man. I took it easy. I'm not gonna talk any big names here. You want to?
No, I'm tired of these people getting drafted and crazy. Like, we're gonna call it out. It is what it is. Like, Saquon Barkley, stop drafting him in the first round. Like, his ADP 2 weeks ago, I thought was perfect. He was in that running back 8-9 spot because a lot of uncertainty with the Philly offense. He was being drafted in the mid to late second round, maybe a little early on the second round, depending on how your teams are, if it's 10, 12, so on. I thought that was perfect for Saquon. But now his ADP is skyrocketing. He's now being treated as running back 4. He's now being treated at the end of the first round, and it's blowing my mind. There is nothing that Saquon has done as of recent to keep that value there. Maybe it's the hype. Maybe it's he's in Philly. It's a better offensive line, which is completely understandable. There's a lot that defenses have to focus on, so they can't just focus on Saquon. But here's the thing: Saquon was the only weapon for the New York Giants, and teams knew that, and he was still very effective when healthy. Now he goes to a team where he is not the focal point in this offense. It's Jalen Hurts is the focal point, and then our two boys in A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. Like, those are the focal point. Those two are going to be fed. They got paid very well. They did not pay those guys to just not catch balls. You still have Dallas Goedert. You still have the legs of Jalen Hurts, and you still have the red zone threat of Jalen Hurts. So for me, unless they completely change this offense and Barkley gets all the red zone activity, which I don't think is going to happen, I am not drafting Barkley in the first round. So it is what it is. Like, stop it. Please stop drafting him. And if someone else wants to draft him in the first round, go for it. I will gladly take a player like Jahmyr Gibbs or heck, even Jonathan Taylor. I'll stretch and grab in the first round compared to Saquon at this point.
Yeah, I feel that, man. The volume probably won't be what it looked like last year, his whole tenure in for New York. So I respect that take, man. That's you went crazy on me, man. I'm gonna talk 3 running backs here. They're way down in the rankings. I'm gonna start it off with 27 ranked Tony Pollard. I just think he's overvalued. I mean, you got Tyjae Spears there, who is a pretty damn good running back, passing back, whatever you want to call him, hybrid. With Derrick Henry there, well, Tony Pollard is not King Henry, so maybe Tyjae Spears has even a better second year, and maybe Tony Pollard's the guy. Maybe the season he had 2 years ago is the truth, and that's all fine and dandy, and I'll be willing to take that loss on this one. But and this is not a first round pick of your RB1 by any means, but we're talking about maybe your RB2 or a flex play. I just can't justify Tony Pollard right here. Yes, Tennessee has upgraded their offensive line and maybe things look better. Now we hear DeAndre Hopkins isn't going to be there, for the rest of the training camp, may miss a game or two into the regular season, but they still had upgraded their offensive attack. They have Tyler Boyd now. They have Calvin Ridley. So I think that's going to take a lot of, receiving upside away from both of these running backs, him and Spears. But I probably would rather have Spears for a lesser price tag later. But I mean, 27 overall, that's still a RB2. You're still banking on these guys. I mean, there's some guys later I'd rather have at 33, Jonathan Brooks. With Brooks, yeah, he's going to miss 3 or 4 games. But I'll tell you what, if you're a dynamic manager, if you're somebody who's a vet, you got to bet on yourself making the playoffs. And I think Jonathan Brooks does take the reins in that backfield. So I'm not really worried about the first 3 weeks. I'm worried about the last 3. So with Jonathan Brooks, man, I'll take the upside there. Chase Brown is another guy who has massive upside. He's 10 spots later at 37. We mentioned him on the last podcast, Steve. And finally, Austin Eckler, man, at 38. This was a guy who had an abysmal year by our standards last season, 2023. But if you scratch that off the books, 2022, he was the fourth best running back. 2021, he was the second best running back in all of the land. So Austin Eckler maybe gets a spark there with Jaden Daniels and company in Washington. All three of these guys I'd rather draft a round later than Tony Pollard. So I think he's a little bit overvalued. My next guy is Gus Edwards at 31. Again, not a break the bank pick. This is probably going to be your RB2, but can he be trusted is my concern here about Gus Edwards. Last season, he had a nice year. I believe he had 13 rushing touchdowns, which is crazy. That's awesome. If he can do that again, this takes out the window. But if he can't, if he's getting challenged by J.K. Dobbins, Kamani Vidal, the rookie, I mean, this is really a risky pick to me. Last season, he did have 198 carries, which is his best, and that was great volume and a great RB2 for your teams. But he also had his lowest yards per attempt efficiency with 4.1, something to keep in mind. Like, I don't know if he's really built for all that. I don't know if he's going to be asked to do all that in LA this year. So, I mean, we're talking about Gus Edwards at 31. Kamani Vidal, I mean, this not a guy who needs to be drafted at this point unless he tears it up in the preseason in extremely shallow leagues. But most of my leagues are deeper. And if I'm playing in deeper leagues, if I had to pick one of these guys, it's absolutely Vidal, 4 or 5 rounds later at least. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if this rookie has some juice, and this is one of the better rookie running backs of the class. So Vidal is definitely a guy who I'd rather take rather than Gus Edwards, 37 spots ahead. Another guy is Javonte Williams, right behind Gus Edwards at 32. I think he's a bit overvalued. I mean, this is not Sean Payton's pick. I think, people say that at this point, camp hearings are that Javonte Williams has restored that role. I'm still calling it smoke, man. I really don't, it's not like, I don't believe in Javonte Williams. I just believe guys behind him. So the fact that he's not Sean Payton's pick, I believe that Denver is going to be a truly horrendous team this year offensively. So when you're losing in games, you can't really run the ball too much. So how many carries is he actually going to get? Last season, he had 3.6 yards per attempt, which is not great by any standards. Before that, I'm sorry, not before that. His career, he's had 2.9 receptions per game. So when they are down in games, is he really a guy who's going to be built like that to get a bunch of catches? I don't really think that's the truth. I think they have somebody behind them, behind Javonte Williams, who's actually better. Javonte Williams was at 32. Jaleel McLaughlin's who I'm buying in this backfield at 47. He had 5.4 yards per attempt last year and only 3 starts, but already that's 5.4 is better than Javonte Williams in any of his years so far, healthy or not healthy. So I think even though he's undrafted, he's proven himself in that regard. Also, when we talk about you're down in games, what can you do catching the ball? Jaleel McLaughlin had 5.2 yards per reception. That is better than Javonte Williams his last 2 years. Javonte had a nice 7.3 yards per reception in his rookie year, but those days to me are far and few behind, and I don't know if he's going to return to that form. So Javonte Williams, probably somebody who those inexperienced drafters will be like, oh, I need a starting running back for my RB2. I'm going to take Javonte Williams. Don't be one of those guys. Wait a couple rounds, 15 running backs later, and take Jaleel McLaughlin. Moving into tight ends.
If your starting running back is Javonte, oh man, that's not good.
That's somebody's going to be that guy. I need a second running back, right? I'm going to take
that zero running back guy.
Exactly. Moving into tight ends, I got 4 of them for you. These guys are all ranked 10 through 15. David Njoku, 10. Brock Bowers, 11. Dalton Schultz, 14. Cole Kmet, 15, right? So let me start off with David Njoku. I mentioned Deshaun Watson, 1.2 touchdowns per game. I'm just not buying it with Njoku. He should be a big red zone factor. I don't know if he's going to be. I mean, we saw Joe Flacco come in and do better than Deshaun Watson last year. Maybe the yards per game, receiving yards per game for Njoku's there. But at 10 overall, I'm just not going to put my hand in that pot. I'm just not going to bet that at all. Brock Bowers, man, 11. We talk about we saw Sam Laporta have a great rookie tight end year in fantasy football, but I really am not going to sit here and say that like that's the new norm. I really don't think that's the case. And furthermore, I mean, the Raiders have a great offensive attack, one of the best set of pass catchers. They've got Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, also Michael Mayer with Zamir White. And really, if we're talking about quarterbacks, looking at it, Are we really being so truthful behind Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew? By the way, I think Gardner Minshew is going to win that battle, but yeah, I think this is a limited upside for Brock Bowers, and to be a top 12 tight end coming right out of the gates, I'm not buying that price tag at all. Another guy who's in a loaded offense is Dalton Schultz at 14. I'm not sitting here and saying Dalton Schultz isn't going to have a couple spike games. I think he will, but they're going to be far and few between. I mean, you've got Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs. Joe Mixon here catches balls too. So, and CJ Stroud, can he really be better than he was last year? I love CJ Stroud, and I think he might match last year, but I don't think it's going to get any better. And they just added Stephon Diggs, so I'm out on Dalton Schultz at 14. Cole Kmet, another loaded offense. Mentioned the guys they brought there in Chicago. I mean, you got Keenan Allen, DJ Moore. I mean, Cole Kmet was doing it with Darnell Mooney as his second wide receiver. I don't think he's really going to do it at all this year. This is somebody who you might take as a second tight end in best ball, but I'm just not buying it in redraft. If there's a guy I'm going to take in that 10 to 15 range, it's 16 overall. TJ Hawkinson, how I mentioned with Jonathan Brooks, he's probably going to miss. You have to bank on him missing for the first 4 games, probably on that PUP list. That's what you're going to have to bank on at this point. Anything less than that will be lucky. But at the same time, I mean, if he's going 16th off the board and you're a vet in your league, you're somebody who you're going to make the playoffs, who you think you're banking on making the playoffs, TJ Hawkinson with a rookie quarterback, probably with McCarthy. It doesn't matter who their quarterback is. TJ Hawkinson's a beast. And for me, if I'm making playoffs, if I'm banking on that, I'm going to take TJ Hawkinson over all of these guys. Not as my starting tight end. Like I said, he's going to probably miss a couple games, but somebody who's going to make a difference in those last couple games. So love him. And one of my biggest sleepers, Steve, we've been talking about this guy for so long now, is Cade Otton. Cade Otton's still getting disrespected at 21. Maybe he makes that year 3 jump. The first 2 years weren't, top 12 tight end, but I think that's the potential with Cade Otton, man. I mean, Dave Canales came in and worked wonders here in this offense last season. I don't think because Dave Canales left, the juice is out the window. I think that Baker Mayfield kind of figured things out. I mean, Mike Evans is only getting a little bit older, and maybe Cade Otton does it more in the red zone, but whatever avenue he's going to do it, I hear he's going to be used more. So I'm looking forward to that. Cade Otton at 21, I'm going to sit it out and wait for him over any of these guys I had mentioned. And another guy who I really can't justify the hype right now, who I think is, we're talking about top 24 tight ends now, not paying a premium price tag, with Juwan Johnson at 23. I mean, I just don't see it. A lot of people, I hear a lot of hype about him. I can't see it. I think he's going to have some spike games. He had a couple games with multiple touchdowns in his career, and that's fine and dandy. But, I mean, he's coming off a foot surgery. First off, they have, like Steve mentioned earlier, they have a bad offense there in New Orleans. Now you have a foot surgery. I mean, how much upside does he really have? They have Derek Carr there throwing the ball. Maybe if Spencer Rattler comes in and spins the needle, I think things could change. But I'm just out on Juwan Johnson at 23. A guy who's really deep right now. I have him marked at 14, but I know that's wrong. He's really deep. He might be 41. I might have got dyslexic for a minute there. Jelani Woods. I mean, Jelani Woods, if we're talking about a deep tight end too, if you're in a 18-man league, Jelani Woods, I think, is dripping with potential. His relative athletic scoring was 10, perfect 10, the highest among 998 tight ends since 1987. So, I mean, right now it's perfect. The perfect storm recipe. We're hearing that like Kyle Granson and Mo Alley Cox are going to be number 1 and number 2. I'm looking at my chops on that one. Like, if I have a last round pick, I'm absolutely not going to take Juwan Johnson. Absolutely will take Jelani Woods just for the upside. I mean, you got to count on, Juwan Johnson probably as your 0 tight end. If you're taking him at 23, probably not going to take him at a tight end too. But Jelani Woods, I think, has way more potential. So, that's somebody who I'd rather have. And I think Juwan Johnson, Cole Kmet, Dalton Schultz, Bowers, and Njoku are just all overrated for the tight end landscape. Before I move over to linebackers and defensive backs, I wanted to mention that right now, IDP Plus, we have a promo going on. We had this promo going on in December. Now it is now August. It is draft season. We have still kept this promo going right now. If you are not subscribed already, check out our new website, idpplus.com. Great website, great tools. We have weekly finishes, great articles, great podcasts, just like the one you're listening to right now. You can get that first month for only $1 when you use the promo code mock draft. So once again, go to idpplus.com, check out for your monthly subscription, and type in the promo code mock draft. You will get that first month. Same deal as December, same deal as now. We're being generous with it. for only $1. Let's move on to the defensive side of the coin here. We've got some linebackers, man. I'll tell you what. Steve took an early shot with Saquon Barkley being, I believe it was 6 overall. I'm going to talk about a linebacker who's up there, Nick Bolton at 8. Nick Bolton is coming off an injury-rattled season, but in 2021, as a rookie, we saw the potential. I mean, he had 12 starts. He had 122 tackles. That was good for 9.3 a game. This past season, over 8 starts, when he came back from injury, he only had 60 combined tackles. That's only good for 7.5. Still solid, still deserving of your fantasy lineup. But at 8 overall, we're talking about guys over guys like Alex Singleton, EJ Speed, who I'll get to some other guys. But, I mean, specifically looking at him at over Alex Singleton, absolutely not in my book. I mean, the tackles for loss were down. His rookie season, he had 11 tackles for loss. Last year, he only had 1 in 8 games. That's a little bit scary. So I and I'm not going to sit here and say like Nick Bolton, I think it was injury, and I'm gonna check the box, like put an asterisk. No, I'm not. Nick Bolton's already had an injury. He's re-injured the same injury from he had last season right now in camp. So like let's pump the brakes here. Let's hear if that's a re-aggravation. So I mean, bottom line, like Nick Bolton, could he have a top 8, top 5, top 3 year? Absolutely. He's done that already. But to me, at 8 overall, when you're talking about a guy like over Alex Singleton at 13, I'm not willing to buy that price tag. I'm not willing to take that chance. Another caveat I have about Nick Bolton is like, if you're playing, Alex Singleton plays for the Denver Broncos, you're going to be pretty bad, who are probably going to get the ball run down their throat. I mean, the Chiefs are going for a 3-peat here. Nick Bolton is great in pass coverage, so I just don't think the tackle opportunities are going to be there for him. I'm just steering clear of Nick Bolton completely this year. Another guy who's like, we could call him an LB2 is Tremaine Edmunds. His highest tackle mark was a rookie year in Buffalo with 121. In the past 6 years, he's had 6.5 sacks. Not really something to write home. He did have 9 interceptions in that time. So like maybe you could sit here and say, Johnny, he's had over an interception per year. Like to me, that is nothing. Like it's not like he had 5-6 interceptions last year. He's not really that kind of player. So like we got to look at Tremaine Edmunds and grade him on the tackles. And I mean, he has a safe floor, sure, as the LB2 in Chicago, but I don't think he really has much upside or room for upside. As far as 7.6 career tackles per game for Tremaine Edmunds, again, Nick Bolton's last year was 7.5. I'm not going to call 7.6 impressive by any means. I'm fading Tremaine Edmunds 23. I think there's some great linebackers behind him. Another guy right behind him who I'm also fading. This is probably my number 1 fade on the list, offense and defense, respectfully. I'm going to say Frankie Luvu, man. I'll tell you what, I had friends who were like asking me about Frankie Luvu last year. I told them to fade him. I was wrong there. I'll be damned if I'm wrong again. I'll tell you what, Frankie Luvu, yes, he did have 12.5 sacks in the last 2 seasons. That's incredible. Guess what? That was with Carolina. He is not there anymore. He is going to Washington. They have new defensive coordinator, Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn's going to use Jeremy Chin. If we're thinking Jeremy Chin's going to be a dog again, who also was on that Carolina team, ironically. But if we think Jeremy Chin's going to be that guy, they also have Bobby Wagner, who's going to get 130, 140 tackles at minimum. We have to at least expect that. So Frankie Luvu, like, yeah, he might get those 5-6 sacks, but it's going to cost a lot of tackles this year, in my belief. So they also have Jamin Davis, who is not inside anymore. He's moving outside. He's going to start being an outside backer. Maybe that cuts into Frankie Luvu's sack upside. So I just don't really not buying the hype here for Frankie Luvu at all. Sometimes, you'll often hear me say sometimes the grass isn't always greener on the other side. I think by him leaving Carolina, he had Shaq Thompson last year. Shaq Thompson went down. They brought in Deion Jones at one point playing inside backer with him. Of course he was going to flourish. Those days are not here anymore. Those days are long gone. So I think Frankie Luvu is my biggest fade at 24 overall. We got guys on this list later who you can get, linebackers like EJ Speed. I mean, EJ Speed in the last 6 games last season averaged 10.2 tackles. Devin Lloyd last season, probably going to have 0 sacks, probably going to have no interceptions, but 8.5 tackles per game plays at 26 overall. Demario Davis was an absolute dog, over 110 tackles with 6.5 sacks. 6.5 sacks for inside backers, I believe, was the pace setter. He had the most sacks for inside backers. And another guy, I believe he was 40 2 days ago when I made this list, but I think they brought him down to inside 30 now. So they're showing him more respect, is Ivan Pace Jr., man. Ivan Pace Jr. had 10.5 tackles per game, monster, in his last 8 games when he assumed that full-time role. Back and forth early on in the season, but when he did get it those last 8 games, we're hearing he's going to have the green dot again. So, I mean, I just can't justify drafting Tremaine Edmunds, Frankie Luvu at 23, 24 when there's these great linebackers just, a couple rounds later. So I think those are more worthwhile. Bank on the tackles. You can't really look at sacks and call it dependability. So, those are my hot takes, call it maybe, but Tremaine Edmunds and Frankie Luvu not going to be on my list. All right, moving to defensive backs. I got a couple more names here for you. I get excited talking about IDP. Sorry, Steve. But we got Xavier McKinney, my first defensive back, who I'm not touching this year. First off, Xavier McKinney, in his 4 years, he's played 73% of games, which isn't horrible. It's not Kyler Murray. It's not Deshaun Watson injury level status. But to me, there's a little bit of risk here. First off, with staying healthy, only 73% of games he's played. I get it. He had a huge year. 116 tackles last season. He had 4 interceptions last year, 6 in the last 2 years. So, I mean, this is a multifaceted guy. He can get it, multiple ways. He has tremendous value, but you're going to have to pay for it. And I really don't see another guy who I'm going to say, I don't think the grass is really greener on the other side. Last season, he was playing for a bad New York team. They had Jason Pinnock as the free safety. Jason Pinnock was like playing deep every game. I mean, I don't. Maybe Xavier McKinney's going to play in the box heavy, but they also have Javon Bullard there trying to play safety this year, and maybe Bullard takes away some of those tackles. They have some great linebackers in Green Bay, so I mean, I really just don't see the upside. I think that last season his 116 tackles is going to be his absolute best year of his career. That's a hot take maybe, but I just don't see things getting better for Xavier McKinney. And finally, for him, I mean, he's playing in Green Bay. Name me a great safety that Green Bay has had especially for fantasy football terms, IDP. I just really can't name him. It's been like 8 or 10 years since I've seen a great safety come from Green Bay. So I'm out on him. Some guy you can get 4 picks later, 4 safeties later, we'll say, is Julian Love. I love Julian Love, pun intended. He's at 13. I'd rather have Julian Love. Last 2 seasons, Julian Love had over 120 tackles. He had just got extended to that big 3-year contract, so they're invested in him in Seattle. And if we're looking, you're going to tell me that Xavier McKinney had 8 interceptions in the last 2 years. Throw that out the window because Julian Love in the last 2 years had 6. So 2 more picks isn't going to make or break the bank. So to me, I just can't justify drafting Xavier McKinney 9. I think it's a huge, huge risk. And I think Julian Love is as safe as they get, and he's 4 defensive backs later. So I love Julian Love. Another guy I'm going to fade is Harrison Smith at the defensive back position. Harrison Smith played over 900 snaps last season. Great vet, great real-life player. But you know what? I just don't think that he's going to be number 1 or number 2 as far as safeties on his team. I mean, we got Cameron Bynum, who I love, who's right around that 12, 13 range as well. Then we got Josh Metellus, who is only getting better, it looks like, as time goes on. And this is a guy who can play all over the field, get sacks, get picks, pass defense. Harrison Smith, I think you're a great leader. I think the Vikings are going to have a great defense, especially in the backfield this year again. But I just don't expect him to really do much in IDP. He has a huge name, huge repertoire, resume in his career, but I'm out on him this year. I just think the other 2 guys are really the bread and butter of that defensive backfield. Harrison Smith's going to be a leader, but not on your IDP team, so don't fall for that. I'd rather have a guy like Amani Hooker. Harrison Smith's at 32. Amani Hooker's at 38. Hooker averaged 6.5 tackles per game. Granted, he's had some health issues, but I think if he stays healthy for this Tennessee defense, I think he's going to be a great, tremendous buy low. Also, Taylor Rapp. I'd rather have him over Harrison Smith. Taylor Rapp's at 40, but he's had over 90 tackles in 3 of the 5 seasons he's played so far. Now he's getting a starting role, I assume, at least by the time training camp's over. He'll be deemed a starter in Buffalo. Those 2 years, he didn't hit 90 or more tackles. He was injured for the Rams, and he was not a starter last year. So I think if Taylor Rapp is deemed a starter and he's healthy, boom, he's a great pick. No need to draft Harrison Smith at 32 when you got guys like Hooker and Rapp a couple rounds behind them. And finally, somebody who I just can't justify as a defensive back, another hard pass for me is Geno Stone. Geno Stone for Baltimore. I get it. He wasn't a safety the whole time, but 127 tackles in 51 games. That's just over 2 a game. That's not going to do it. In 2023, he had only 6 games with 5 or more tackles. again, you can get 6.5 sacks, Antoine Winfield. Like, you can do that 1 year. It doesn't really impress me. I'm here to look at the tackle numbers. The big caveat with Geno Stone is a lot of people are looking at, he had 7 picks. He had 7 interceptions in 2023. Well, guess what? In the 3 years before that, he had a combined 8. So it's like, he's not going to have 7 again this year. He's in Cincinnati. They have Von Bell there. They have Jordan Battle there. I'd rather have Jordan Battle. I don't know if he's going to be the starter or not, but that's really the only defensive back I'm looking at to roster an IDP this year for Cincinnati. Geno Stone just can't justify it. Don't chase the interceptions. He's not going to hit 7 again, even if he is the starter. I'll put my bank account on that. And finally, there's 2 guys. If you're going to take a deep shot, at safety, defensive back, PJ Locke, Jordan Battle. I mentioned Jordan Battle's a teammate of Geno Stone, but ranked lower. He's 68. PJ Locke, 61. I mean, PJ Locke last year in the last 7 games when he was deemed a starter, he had 6.5 tackles per game. He had 5 pass defense in those last 7 games and 3 straight games with sacks. And Jordan Battle, he wasn't getting in the backfield much. He was a solid tackler. I believe he had a little bit over 5 tackles per game. To me, I just think wait it out. Like, don't really take Geno Stone. Don't believe the hype, even if he is deemed a starter. If Jordan Battle is not a starter, just don't pick him, but don't chase the hype with Geno Stone, Harrison Smith, or Xavier McKinney. Steve, is there anything you'd like to say before we sign off, my brother?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, don't chase interceptions. I've seen people go after Deron Bland because of what he did last season, especially cornerbacks. Cornerbacks are so hard. There's only maybe 2 or 3 cornerbacks I would trust when it comes to IDP that are consistently making tackles and making plays. So try to stay away from those guys. And again, we're not saying these guys are bad players and that we shouldn't draft them, but just based off of where these guys are falling and where people are starting. I mean, because again, it's mock draft season or you're drafting already. Like, my home league is drafting a week from Saturday or Sunday. So like, they're starting to happen already. So these are what you're seeing right now is pretty accurate as where these players are falling in a lot of these drafts. So we're just trying to give you insight to help you navigate and go to a different player, maybe go to a different position if needed. I always talk about my league where we might have one guy who starts the run of grabbing linebackers first while everyone else is like, oh crap, now we got to start doing defense. Like everyone's always kind of hesitant. When do we start grabbing a defensive player? And all it takes is one person to do it. And sometimes you go with the flow and you start diverting and you go back to the linebacker, or you feel really confident in your research. You feel really confident in what's out there because linebacker can be a pretty deep, position. Maybe you still take advantage of that and say, hey, I'm going to grab another receiver. I'm going to grab a tight end or something like that to shore up your offensive side. So, this is what we're here for. We'll help you out. Stop drafting names just because they're a name. Look at where these players are falling. Look at you talk about, especially running backs. This year is so different with so many running backs with so many different homes. Like, we don't know what their schemes are going to be like. We're basing off previous stats. Like, I love the idea of Derrick Henry in Baltimore. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate well. So you got to be careful of those. Don't necessarily go after these players, but just stay away if their draft is a little bit too rich for you. You'll know it. You'll feel it. But these guys are definitely players that we're all trying to avoid because of how much they cost.
And it's August 7th right now. I did my research for this 2 days ago. Rankings already changed from those 2 days. So this is this point in time. We've got a couple more weeks of preseason in us. So, this is just a face look right now, face value. Stay up with the rankings. These things might change. Every day things change. So thank you for rocking with us. Steve, good insight. I appreciate you running this pod with me. Hey, we'll see you next time on IDP Plus Trends. Thanks to all our viewers and listeners.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.